Our story this week is from the Spark Story Bible. David is chosen. God said to Samuel, remember Samuel from our story from last week? Last week, we read about Samuel was a little boy serving God in the temple with Eli teaching him, and we learned about how Samuel heard God calling him. In our story today, Samuel's all grown up. He's been serving God for a long time. God said to Samuel, I have a job for you. I want you to anoint a new king. Here's what you need to do. Bring a horn filled with oil to Bethlehem and look for Jesse and all of his sons. One of his sons will be the next king. Samuel was afraid that God's job was too scary. The old king was still around, and he was a very mean guy. But God promised Samuel, I'll help you. So Samuel walked to Bethlehem and found Jesse. Line up all your sons and let's see who will be the next king, Samuel said to Jesse. Samuel looked at his first son, Eliab, and felt sure God would choose him to be king. Eliab was big and good looking, but God disagreed. Samuel was looking at the outside of Eliab, seeing how strong he looked. God was looking on the inside and did not see the right love in Eliab's heart. One by one, the sons came forward to see if they would be chosen. This one? Nope, sorry. This one? No. How about this one? Don't think so. Finally, they ran out of sons. Except for one, that is. Jesse's son David was outside watching the sheep. They called for him. David came inside. He smelled a little bit like sheep, but his eyes sparkled with joy and love. David was just a boy, gentle and quiet. Samuel tried to see David from outside and inside. This one? A hush fell over the room as everyone waited. God said yes to Samuel. Yes, Samuel told everyone. Samuel poured oil from the horn onto David's head, anointing him with God's love and joy. David would be the next king. David and Goliath. King Saul and his army looked out from their mountain hideout. King Saul was still the king. He was the mean king that we heard about in our previous story where we learned about David being anointed. David isn't yet king. He's still just a young boy. King Saul and his army looked out from their mountain hideout. Their enemies, the Philistines, were camped on the opposite mountain. In the valley between stood Goliath, the tallest man Saul had ever seen. Who will fight me? Goliath roared, waving his spear. Who can face the mighty Goliath? He shouted, lifting his sword. Saul and his army were afraid. They could not win against the Philistines. They could not beat Goliath. Surely they would be captured and become slaves. A beam of sunlight bounced off of Goliath's bronze helmet. His voice shook the leaves in the trees. All the birds hid in their branches. Send out your best warrior, Goliath ordered. Let him fight against me. If I win, you will be our slaves. If your soldier wins, we will serve you and your God. Saul waited. No one stepped forward to take Goliath's challenge. Saul felt a small tug on his sleeve. Looking down, he saw David, a young shepherd boy. I will do it, King Saul, David said. I will fight Goliath. You are a boy. How can you beat a gigantic man like Goliath? Saul turned to go. Wait, King Saul, David said. God protects me from the wolves and the bears that go after my sheep. God will protect me now, too. David reached down and picked up 5 smooth stones. In his right hand, he carried the same sling he used to chase away the wolves and wild animals. Saul patted David's head and pointed down the rocky path leading to the valley. Goliath laughed when he saw David. You are the warrior they send out against me? David slipped his hand into his pouch and selected a stone. I am not afraid of your spear and sword, Goliath, David said. God will help me. David rushed toward Goliath, swinging his sling. The smooth stone flew through the air and hit Goliath in the forehead. Down, 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 Goliath fell. Down fell his sword. Down fell his spear. Down fell his mighty shield. David picked up Goliath's bronze helmet from the ground and held it high in the air. Saul and all his soldiers rose up with a shout. David, a small shepherd boy, had beaten the mighty Goliath. When the Philistines saw that Goliath had fallen, they were afraid and ran away. Trusting in God gave David courage when he needed it most.